Hello everyone. Let's start with a new chapter, Indian economy on the eve of independence. And let's look at Indian economy pre pre-independence through a colonial lens. So before the arrival of the British, Indian economy was called a golden bird of the world, and it was self-reliant both in terms of its agrarian dependence and cottage industries, which means most of the people they were engaged in agricultural based activity because India is fed by two monsoons, the southwest monsoon and the northeast monsoon, and they are around 10,000 small and big rivers which provide irrigation facilities which provide conducive atmosphere for agricultural led growth. And the second one, cottage industry, it meant the most of the people in their lean season they engage in some or other manufacturing activity, and this activity it was decentralized. It means there were no large factories, there were no common factories. Every household has its own industry, which was known as cottage industry. So various stoneworks, stone and metal works, handicrafts, agri-based products, clothes, both weaving and spinning. So such industry it existed in India before the arrival of the British, and it was set in a decentralized motion. And also it was the time before um, before 18th century. So it was the time when the Indian products they were in greater demand all over the world. And since the Indian, their lifestyle, it was so simple and so industrious. Since every household was engaged in both agriculture and cottage-based industry, so we are either producing agricultural produce or the manufactured produce. So in both the cases, our products they were sold in the world over. They were sold globally. And because of this sale, most of the bullion, that is, most of gold and silver, it it found a place in Indian treasuries or Indian economy. So because of this this arrival of gold and silver by the sale of Indian products, India before 18th century it had a lot of bullion wealth, a lot of gold and silver that got accumulated the time over, and the prominence of Indian economy could be gauged by the statistic that India and China both together they controlled 25% of the world trade at that time. But the British, so I'm citing another statistic of 20th century, 20th century that is 1900 to 1999. So the first half of 20th century, 1900 to 1947, the the contribution of Indian product to the world trade it declined to mere 2%. So because of the arrival and accumulation of gold and silver, our country was known as Golden Bird. And because of uh, this moniker, and because of the riches that were being told by many foreign travelers, so we caught the eye, we caught the attention of the world, we caught the attention of the powers of the world over when such um, foreign travelers, whichever you name it, such as Francois Tavernier, Bernier, and all such foreign travelers. So in their memoir, in their traveling accounts, they told about the riches of our country. And because of those riches, the European powers, which uh, which they wanted to have a foothold in all the continents, they found a way to India. You might have heard about Vasco da Gama, and you might have heard about Columbus as well. So both of these travelers, both of these navigators, they were sent by their own ruler so that a passage to India could be found. Well, let's talk about where we started. So this was the state of India before the arrival of the British. And when the British arrived, they exploited India. It is said that they exploited India. So how did they exploit India? The exploitation, it was done in two phases. First, they turned India into a feeder economy, and the second, they made India a market for their finished products. So the meaning of both, which is the British first, they destroyed Indian industry. They destroyed India's agriculture and cottage industries. So much so that it was reeling under famine and debt. And now, after having destroyed cottage and agricultural industries, the raw material that was being produced, they bought the raw material at throwaway prices and sent them to the industries in Britain. So the industry in Britain, such as those in Lancashire and Manchester, and many such industry of finished products, many such factories, they they consume those raw material that was being bought, and the finished product which they produce, the Indian economy, or Indian people were sold the same finished product at higher prices. So this was a form of exploitation that was resorted to by the British. It was trade exploitation that disturbed, that impoverished us. So that was one thing. I'm just giving an idea how the British came to become so powerful. So it was in their subtle maneuver, subtle, rational, and cunning maneuvers by which they got prospered. We didn't know before they got our neck in their hand. So here you can see that we were paying twice. We were being charged twice. At first, the raw material that was being produced, it was bought at very low prices. And before that, before the arrival of the British, our we did not had to we did not have to sell our raw material to any person or any trader, because we had our own industries and we were producing our goods. But they destroyed, they created a monopoly, and out of it, the the farmers, the peasants, the traders, they did not have anything else other than selling their raw material to the British on their own terms. And then, since we were not producing anything, And people need resources, people need clothes to wear, people need other metal and manufactured goods. So the same were provided by the British at higher prices. So this was a subtle and cunning maneuver, economic gameplay that destroyed us, that broke our backs. Now, status of Indian economy under colonial rule. So before, as I already explained, that we were self-sufficient, we had working manufacturing at industries, handicraft and cotton, silk, textile, metal and precious stone works. But the economic policies, they economic policies, they were concerned only with their own self-interest, the interest of their home country, the interest of um, the industry that was set up by them, and by which they transformed country from a net supplier uh, from a net producer into a net supplier of raw material and consumer of finished goods. This was what I explained in double charge mechanism. And yes, there have been some mechanism of estimation of national and per capita income at the time, and some of which, such as by Dadabhai Naoroji, William Digby, Findlay Siraj, and the gist of which is that the aggregate real output during the first half of 20th century was less than 2%. Yes, so from 1900 to 1950, the output, it declined to 2%. So you can imagine the situation before the arrival of Europeans, it was around 25%, but the British, they reduced it to mere 2%. That with severe stagnation, that growth was not happening, which is written here. There are 2% coupled with a meager half percent growth in per capita per year. So this is almost negligible. Now let's talk about individual sector. First, agriculture sector. So under the British rule, it was fundamentally agrarian. It means agricultural led, and 85% of population, it was dependent on agriculture one way or another. Yes, this is the case of the foreign account that I have been talking about. The French traveler Bernier, he described Bengal that it was Bengal was richer than Egypt. Its exports, its abundance, cotton, silk. So it doesn't matter what he said. But the gist of which is, crux of which is that India possesses untold riches. India possesses something that Europe did not have. And this and such traveling accounts, it attracted the attention of many powers from globally. Then in matters of growth, agriculture was stagnated. Stagnated means halted, stopped. Agriculture was not growing, and this low agriculture productivity, it was because of land revenue policies or land settlement policies that were undertaken by the British. Now let's uh, let's brief about what land settlement policies are. Look, any government, whether it is a monarch, a ruler, a democracy, a semi-democracy, a dictatorship, whichever it is, it needs money or revenue to function. Revenue for administration, revenues for governance and military purposes. So all in all, This revenue, it will be provided by the land that comes under a particular power, comes under a power. So let's say the situation before the British and the situation from 1757 to 1947. So before the arrival of British, there were rulers, monarchs, empires such as Mughals and Sultans. So this was the time the Delhi Sultanate, it established in 1191. So from 1191 to 1730s. So 1191 is also the time of the year of first Battle of Karain, and the decline of the whole empire thing, it happened in 1730s. So I am not giving any fixed date. It is because after the death of Farrukh Shah, that was happened in 1720, the Mughal Empire, it started declining, and it was in severe decline because of many factors, and you will read about them in the history book. But this was all in all a long reign of empires from 1191, first Battle of Tarain, to 1730s. And this middle period from 1730s to the first Battle of Plassey, 1757, it was a period of turbulence in which the British, they established themselves, they got their foothold. So before the arrival of British, first a cultural phenomena in which whoever arrived here from the ancient time, whether it was Scythians, Mongols, Kushanas, whoever arrived here, first they got settled here. So this gesture of settling a foreign invader in a particular country, in a native country, this gesture may seem simple enough, but here is the catch. Since the foreign invader, he is settling at some place, so he is possessing that place. So in that case, the the place, it will not be foreign for the invader. It will not be an alien country, and he will not ruin it himself. So if the invader, he is just there for looting, if just there for exploitation, such as Gauri and Muhammad Gauri and Ghazni and many such who came before them, just for the purpose of exploiting the riches, looting the riches, and taking them back home. But many, the Turks and Afghans and Persians, they arrived here and they got settled. So in this gesture, they adopted the country, they adopted the place where they find refuge. And if you are settling at some place, you will do something for it. You will do something to make the place where you got settled, so that the whole lineage, whole empire, whole government, all such thing, it will be continued. You will not loot it any further. You will not exploit the subjects where you are living in. So it was a simple gesture. And in the same case of the British one, the cultural difference was that they did not come here to settle. No settling. So their purpose was simple: to exploit India, to loot all the riches and take them back home, take them to United Kingdom, take them to feed or run the industry that they had back home. So at first a cultural difference, it was glaring. Then whoever governs somewhere, whoever settles, space I'm talking about, empires. I'm talking about kings. I'm talking about invaders. So, whichever place they get settled in, they need revenue to function. They need revenue to govern. Revenue is from money that is charged on land. So whatever you are growing or producing on land, it will be charged. Some taxes will be there. So these were the taxes. Now, if you are settled at some place, you are going to enrich the place because your to run the empire of whatever length, you need revenue maximization because it is not a one-off thing. You are not just draining or milking the land at one time so that you can bring, you can extract which whatever is possible and then gather all the resources, gather all the revenue and take them somewhere else. It since you have planned to get settled, you will employ such revenue maximization policy which enrich the land, which will work to prosper the land, and it will draw a balance between those who are working on such land and those who are working for it. So the peasants who are working on it and the whole administration who is working for it, you will keep a balance between it. So by which I mean their revenue policies, they were lenient. They understood that yes, times can fail, rains can fail, people may have unforeseen circumstances. There may be famines, there may be droughts. People will may not have revenue at the time, and the policies they may have gone bad. Harvests they might have gone bad. So it was in their leniency, and leniency was because of this cultural gesture that they had planned to settle here. So the leniency was also one form of revenue maximization policy because if they are going to milk people, if they are going to extract everything out of people up to their last penny, then it is not difficult to imagine that this whole revenue structure will collapse sooner or later. So it was how the revenue policies were employed by the Mughals and the sultans. Then talk about the British. So British were opposite to the former rulers. Their only purpose was to extract as much as possible. Their whole mind spoke about nothing but to drain India of everything that it has, to drain the soils, to drain the rivers, to drain the trees, to pauperize, to impoverish India up to the last penny and take all the riches, gather them and ship them all back to the coast of Thames. Thames is a river in London. So it means what I meant is that their revenue policies they were exploitative. They did not work for revenue maximization. They did not care about people. They did not care about droughts and bad harvests and famines and any such balance of subjects. All they care about was just exploit the revenue, take it and take it back home. Then the revenue thing. Now how such policies are made. Revenue policies. Suppose you are a king and you own this piece of land. So what you will do, you will distribute this land among your prince, your governors, whoever working on particular piece of land, your ministers and nobles. Say the four people are these are your staff. So you distribute the land among them. And now these people themselves, since this is a piece of land that has been given to the prince, now the prince himself, he cannot work on it. So he will distribute this piece of land among his vassals or vice governors, and take this piece of land of a vice governor who himself cannot govern it, because he has another duties and other responsibilities to work upon. So he will distribute the land among distributaries such as Jamindar. So in India's case, these were the local revenue collectors. So, and below which they were only peasants and farmers and sharecroppers, those who were tiling and working on a particular land. And now the Zamindar, each of the Zamindar, Z1, Z2, Z3, Z4, for each of Zamindar, they had a specific allotted land beneath them. They collected the revenue, kept some for them, and sent it back to the vice governors. And in the same way, the vice governors, they collected the revenue from all the land that they possessed. They kept something for them and sent it to the prince. And the prince himself, he collected all the revenue from all the land that belonged to various vice governors. He gathered all such revenue, kept something for himself, and sent it to the king or the emperor or the state treasury or empire treasury. So this was how the land revenue thing worked in the ancient time or the medieval time. And and you know that, yes, the king or the ruler any emperor, he could not go about collecting the revenue himself, nor will the prince, the governor, the ministers, the nobles. So it was uh, administrative hierarchical structure that was being followed. It wasn't such formal as we saw in the British time and that we see during the present time. But yes, it was some informal but and existential mechanism so that revenue could be collected. And now each of these men who had a share of land beneath them, they were responsible for them. They were accountable to the prince, to accountable whoever was the higher authority. So each of them, they had an administrative reasons to follow revenue maximization policies, because it is the ultimately the amount of revenue collection that mattered, but it was also a balance that needed to be sought between um, their own benefit, their own personal riches, their own luxury, but also the revenue that could be extracted. And the last collector or the last contact between zamindar and last contact between the king and peasants, it was the zamindar. So in the earlier cases, he worked he worked for people, he pursued such revenue maximization policy, and there was some benevolent relationship, a father and son kind of relationship, uh, ruler and subject kind of, raja and praja kind of relationship that existed. And because of this informal and casual mechanism, the both the Delhi Sultanate and the Mughals, they prospered for many centuries. But the revenue policy that were administered by the British, so one such policy, the permanent settlement. So the British, they also needed money, money for everything, money for exploitation, money for looting, and money for um, filling the course of the Thames. So they employed this settlement, revenue settlement, that is known as permanent settlement, which was first uh, was administered in the provinces of Bengal, which consist of present-day West Bengal, Bangladesh, Odisha, and such fertile region. So their permanent settlement policy, it consisted of these pointers. First, since it was a permanent settlement for 30 years, they kept the interest rate, they kept the revenue rate, taxation rate very high. And the reason behind it, they thought that since the revenue rate is permanent and it is permanent for 3 decades, so with time the taxation will settle itself. With time, they may be extracting a higher rate right now, but during the good harvest, since they are not changing the revenue rate, so it is the peasant, it is the jamindar who are going to benefit from it. So it was a balancing mechanism, the idea that was given by them. First, they employed higher taxes, but second, they also employed sunset clause. So by sunset clause, it meant if a particular zamindar holding a particular piece of land, if he could not if he could not submit the pre-agreed amount of revenue by sunset of a particular pre-decided date, if he could arrange it, his zamindari, it will be auction. So the zamindar now they are caught in a fix. Since earlier ruler they were lenient, they were flexible mechanism, but now it has become rigid. And if they do not exploit people, if they do not extract anything that comes from people, or extract everything that could be milk from people, they are going to lose their jamindari. They are going to lose their own job. So in that case, in such a rigid mechanism, they resorted to exploitation themselves because they did not have anything to do. So such revenue maximization policy, they were already gone. Now it was sheer exploitation by both the British and the zamindars, and each of them were worked for, each of them exploited for their own benefits. And at last, the the losers, or the people who lost the most, were farmers, poor farmers, peasants, sharecroppers. So these people lost everything. First, even if it was a bad monsoon, it was a drought, they could not complain. They had to arrange the pre-decided revenue somehow, because in that case, zamindar would resort to such uncanny practices. So because of this revenue exploitation policies, the Indian agriculture, it got detracked in the sense that first, revenue maximization policy could not be followed at all. Since and the reason of which is everyone, including the farmers, the peasants, the zamindars, and whoever was above them in the hierarchy, each of them, they were working to save themselves. So even if zamindar, he saw that a particular piece of land needs better irrigation facilities, or there could be something that could be done to maximize the revenue. There could be some technological advancement. There could be something that could save the land or increase the fertility, but nothing of such could be maximized because each of these endeavors they needed money, and here money was desperately needed by all people on those who were on the chain, including the farmer and peasants themselves. So ultimately, agriculture it got ruined so much so that this collapse of agriculture and this collapse of agriculture it was followed by ruination of cottage industry since the British they also created monopoly in Indian produces that what Indian produce and what was sold here. So because of both of these reasons, India was ravaged by bouts of famines. We have had around 150 famines all in all during the British rule, and that costed us dearly. Many people, property, animals, they were lost because of such artificial droughts. Now, here it is mentioned that because at partition, a fertile land on both sides of our country, both sides of Indian subcontinent, in western Pakistan and in eastern Pakistan, these area were partitioned. So a sizable portion it went to Pakistan on both sides. So this agricultural land it could have provided some relief during the time of independence, but it could not. And what is here is being talked about is India's jute industry. So here the example is given only for the eastern side, but I'm also referring the western side. Even in the western side, let's say this was this the Indian subcontinent before the arrival of the British. So this Indian subcontinent it was fed by many rivers, prominent of which were these two. This the western river Indus and the eastern river Brahmaputra. So both the rivers uh, they helped in sustaining agricultural economy, and both the rivers since they not only provide water but also silt. Silt is you can say a fertile soil that is prerequisite that is needed so that generation after generation agriculture produce could be assured. Now because of partition on both count we lost both these areas. This fertile area on the eastern side right now, which is Bangladesh, and this fertile area on the western side right now, which is the western Pakistan or the Pakistan or Pakistan, just Pakistan. So we lost on both counts, and the example here is given of India's jute industry that existed in the eastern side, which is now in Bangladesh. And let's talk about the industrial sector. Now let's talk about the status of industrial sector during the colonial economy. And point one and point two both have been explained. The primary motive of the colonial government behind their harassing policy it was to systematically deindustrialize India in two ways. First, to turn India into to an exporter of raw material, and then to turn to use India for their finished products or to use Indian market for their finished products. Next, the decline of the indigenous handicraft industries It not only created massive unemployment, but there has been created a new demand in the Indian mm, market which was deprived of supply of locally goods. So the meaning of this whole passage, the industrial status, was that the British, they deindustrialized Indian economy, which means that Indian industry, it was destroyed. And it has already been said multiple times that India was primarily an economy of cottage industries, or industry at household level, decentralized household industries. So every house had some kind of industry working in it. It may be a spinning pool, uh, a weaving house, a metal working house, and all such produce at the household level. They were collected at the village level, and the trader, which was situated in a town or a city, would come every now and then to collect all the goods. But the British, when they destroyed cottage industry, since they did not have a collective voice and trader who used to provide them, who used to patronize them, they the traders, they left the left the people, they left those working on such cottage households, because now the demand of Indian cottage made products, it declined rapidly. And this decline was thanks to the industries that were established in Britain, the factories that were established, and those factories, they were producing mass scale goods. So the difference between these two, uh, uh, the cottage industry, they were not only inferior in terms of quality, but they were also inferior in terms of time and units produced. Since a cottage industry, or an industry at the household level, they could only produce a fewer goods as compared to what a factory can produce. And British, since they were also the legal sprawler in our country, they created monopoly. So the monopoly in the sense that no European powers could compete with the British goods. So the Indian deindustrialization, it was a twofold process. First, when the cottage industries were not working and people were in dire need of money and employment, and the same employment could not absorb by agriculture, and cottage industry itself deindustrialized or destroyed. In such a case, people had to sell their raw material at very low prices, at minimum prices. And then, since there were no industries and no employment, no factories, no Indian-based products, so in that case, people needed to consume. People as consumers, they needed material, they needed commodities, and all such commodities were provided by the British without any competition. So because of the absence of any competition from other peers, they enjoyed monopoly. They sold their produce at higher prices, and since the decline of handicraft, it created massive unemployment. But there were also a large Indian consumer market, because earlier those products, those Indian needs, they were met by the household industries. That's what self-sustained economy means, that we were producing and consuming at the same time. It was kind of an invisible barter system, such as a household in a village, he is weaving clothes, and the same another household, he was making agri-based products, and there was another who was who was making tools, metal tools, and there were another who were working on embroidery and handicrafts. And since people did not have those many such demands, most of their basic needs they were met by their peers, met by their neighbors, met in the village itself. And whatever surplus they are left with after exchanging among themselves, that surplus that used to be gathered by trader which was situated in a town or cities, and then a trader would cater to the other demand that was present that time. But since the whole basis of self-sustained economy, it was destroyed, unemployment and large consumer market, it was deprived of locally made goods, which were cheaper, which were qualitative. And since people needed goods, this demand it was met by increasing imports from cheap manufactured goods from Britain. And next, the second half of 19th century means from 1850 to 1900. This modern industry began to take roots in India. And since the British, they were also legal tyrants, they could not allow establishment of any industry by Indians. So it was um, a subtle maneuver, a cunning maneuver, so that any establishment of British Indian industry could be halted. It was for their own benefit, since any competition from the Indian itself, it is bound to jeopardize the profit that was accrued by them. So the British initially they could not uh, allow such an activity, and they did their best so that industry, the infant industry, they could be destroyed, they could be nipped in the bud. Initially, the industry it, it limited itself up to cotton and textile mills, and the cotton textile mills that were dominated by Indians were located in western parts, Maharashtra, Gujarat, and jute mills they were concentrated in foreigners, but that were also manned by foreigners. Then Tata Industry, they established first, Jamshedji Tata established first iron and steel industry TISCO in 1907, and then came sugar, cement, paper, most of them after World War, and the need of India, Indian and world economy, it could not be met by the British themselves since they were busy in fighting the World War. So Indian industrialists they got a favor here and they exploited this opportunity. But then there was hardly any capital good industry. So capital good industry are the industry that produce tools which are consumed by other factories or industries. And capital good industry it forms basis of a sound economy, since every factory producing any kind of good it needed some intermediate tools, and such tools needed to be provided by locally, otherwise their import it going to charge them higher prices, and it is also going to charge more on the exchequer. But such capital good industry there were none there, and the British they could not allow such establishment. Then the gross domestic product it remained very small. Another drawback of Indian economy, Indian industrial sector, it was limited area of public sector. So public sector means the services that cater to public demand or the demands of the masses, such as transportation, communication, power generation, energy. So this sector it limited itself to infrastructure only of railway, power generation, communication, ports. So the other areas of public sector such as uh, establishment of hospitals, medical services, dispensaries, schools, colleges, all weather roads. So they were absent at that time. Next, talk about the foreign trade. The scenario of foreign trade was that India was again an exporter of raw materials of raw silk, cotton, wool, sugar, indigo, jute, and importer of finished goods of cotton, silk, woolen clothes, capital goods, light machinery, etc. So this was how we were doubly charged. Then Britain maintained a monopoly over India's exports and imports. So Indian by themselves, then they did not have the political rights or did not have the um, wherewithal to establish their own industry, to work on their own. In simple, the Indian people, they did not have their identity while British stayed here. We could not be given the equal status. So it's not difficult to imagine that in absence of an identity, a collective identity, we could not have gone for imports and exports, or we could not have handled, we could not have been allowed to handle foreign trade on our own. Then more than half of India's foreign trade, it was restricted to Britain in the form of raw material, and the rest it was allowed in allowed to go in China, Sri Lanka, Persia, Iran, and the opening of Suez Canal, it further intensified British control over foreign trade. Now, the important characteristic of India's foreign trade throughout the colonial period was generation of large export surplus. Export surplus, it means out of both, it meant that India was exporting a lot. Export means to sell abroad, to sell in foreign country, sell in foreign market. So export surplus means India was abundantly selling in foreign markets. But as you know, the foreign country that we were selling to, it was the Britain itself. So for the British, it was just a changing of hands. They are buying raw material from here and sending it same to the British factory where it could be turned into manufactured goods. So this export surplus, it was nothing but uh, an accountant, an account malfunction. Yes, it existed. Yes, there was an export surplus, but in real term, and we all know that it wasn't um, a flourishing foreign trade. It was, in short, the extra raw materials that were going out of India, but those raw material they were not sold. They were not finished products, and then the the money that has been accrued by such a sale, it it was not coming to India. It was not coming to India's help. It was not coming to the pockets of Indian people. All of such money, it was accrued by it. It was consumed by the British themselves. And the British, they used the money. They used the money that was coming out of export surplus for their own purposes, uh, which was collectively known as home charges. So home charges, it means the expenses that were incurred by the British to running to run an empire in India. So the empire, the whole governance staff, the whole administrative staff, the war, whatever their activities, home charges means it is the the difference between export and import or here raw material minus finished goods. So in short, the British, they were enjoying a complete monopoly here in the way that the amount that they received from selling the raw material and the difference in the prices between what they bought cheaply, the raw material that they bought cheaply, and the money they got from selling those finished goods. So this difference, which is known as profit, all these profit they were accumulated by the British themselves. They did not reach Indian pockets, and those profits they were accrued or accumulated by the British in the name of home charges. So according to them, since they were governing India, they needed staff, they needed military, and to establish and to run an empire, they needed to go on war, they needed to go on territorial expansion for such militaristic expeditions or adventures. All of such activities they were clubbed in the home charges, which means that the British they were keeping the extra money that they did gain from buying cheaply than the money that they got from selling at higher prices and the difference of it. All of such money, all of such profits, they were accumulated by them and they were not incurring any charges. All the charges, all the expenses there that were met by the Indian people themselves. So this was how they popularized us. Now let's talk about demographic condition during the colonial times. So first such population consensus census it was done in 1881 and after which every 10 years. So before 1921, India was in first stage of demographic transition. First stage of demographic transition means higher birth rate and higher death rate. Since medical supplies were not there and people were reproducing, it was a natural phenomena. Since if many of your kids they could die if death rate is high, so people are likely to reproduce more so that the chances of survival it can increase. So in case of the first stage of demographic transition, in case of higher birth rate and higher death rate, the population increase it is less. Population do not increase that much speed because the difference it is almost negligible. Then the second stage of demographic transition, it started after 1921, in which death rate was, birth rate was high, but death rate it declined somewhat. So now the difference, it could have led a surge in population. But since it was just a second stage of transition, and then the death rate that could have reduced, that rate was that reduced. It was because of some missionary activities, establishment of hospital, education of people, and but still, since it was a primitive stage, so the difference it could not have been such higher. So the population growth rate or total amount of population, total number of population, they could not have gone very high. Then talks about literacy level. It was less than 16%, and out of which female literacy was just 7%. Public health facilities they were unavailable since the British they did not use the public resources. They did not use the profits for the benefit of India. So the establishment of such public sector it was not done by the British themselves. So it is it is foolish to think that the public health facilities could have been developed by the British. They were none. And consequently, water and airborne diseases such as cholera, Heza, they were rampant, and every now and then during famine or during uh, such monsoonal activity, such diseases, they took a heavy toll on life, and the mortality rate, it was also high, particularly the infant mortality rate. Infant mortality rate means the number of infant people, number of infant that are dying per 100,000 of population. So it was 218 per thousand at that time. So it is quite alarming, quite high. To imagine that out of every 1,000, 218 dies prematurely. It speaks of the health status of the country during the colonial times. Then life expectancy, it was also very low, 32 years. You can just imagine the situation at that time, right? So then the average people that were they were living only up to 32 years. So it wasn't that everyone was living at 32 years. It was an it is an average out. It is an averaged uh, average life of those people, but 32 is quite less. Then talks about occupational structure. So occupational structure is distribution of people across different jobs, different occupation, different industries, and agriculture. It remained largest share of workforce. It remains the largest occupier since 70 to 75% of population was engaged in agriculture. Then came manufacturing and services. So manufacturing, it employed 10% and services employed 15 to 20%. Then another aspect was regional variation, in which Madras Presidency, that comprised present-day states of Tamil Nadu, Andhra, Kerala, and Karnataka, or these states, or Madras Presidency, Maharashtra, and West Bengal, they declined independence of workforce on agriculture sector. Most of these people, they shifted themselves to metal and other works. Uh, then we talk about the status of infrastructure. So under basic colonial regime, basic infrastructures, railway, ports, water transport did develop, but their motive was uh, to not to provide services to people, not for the benefit of people, but to serve their own interests, so that raw material, it could be shipped to nearby coasts. Then road constructed at the time, it is not fit for modern transport right now, and it was used for mobilizing the army or drawing out raw material from countryside to nearest railway station. So the state of infrastructure in terms of railway, telegraph were, even though were high, they were not of such quality, and the significant or the most important contribution, the construction of railway, it was somehow good. Yes, but still it was for British interests. Then we talk of railway. So the railway, affected the structure of Indian economy in two ways. First, it enabled people to undertake long distances and break geographical and cultural barriers. Since before that, people could not think about more than 50 or 100 kilometers. And now the establishment of railways, people started coming together. It also enabled the mobilization of people during the nationalist movement. It also broke many cultural barriers that people had in their mind. very a lot of cultural prejudices which hindered India's cultural and social progress. So, railway, which was constructed by the British to serve their own interests, to draw the raw material to nearby coast so that the raw material it could be shipped to the British industries. This railway, this particular contribution stands very high among the whole saga of Indian colonialism. Then this railway it also fostered commercialization of Indian agriculture, which adversely affected the comparative self-sufficiency of Indian economy. So this commercialization of Indian agriculture is that the construction and the work running of Indian railway it help in connection of market. And then when people, especially traders, they could now access the markets that were not available within their permissible distance. They when they got into contact with other markets, other local markets or markets that were situated 200 and 500 kilometers from them, so they got a hint that Indian edible agricultural products they are less in demand than the Indian commercialized agriculture product. So, which means, to example, food grain was less in demand or food grain was gaining less money than indigo or cotton. So food grain is an edible agricultural product, whereas indigo, cotton, jute, these are commercialized agricultural products because they cannot be eaten. And traders and the British both knew this reality, and the construction and running of Indian Railway it helped them to ship their products in every nook and corner of country or to draw out such products from anywhere so that the same material it could be sold to the British or the other markets to gain profits. Then colonial the British they also took measures to develop inland trade. Inland trade means uh, trade which or infrastructure which used to join or to take journeys through waterways such as lakes, small and big rivers. So the inland waterway it was also being tried by the British, but since it was not economical, irrigation facilities were not there, and many rivers they were not predictable. Some rivers such as Kosi, who change her passage, who change her ways or course of river every now and then, it was not possible to dredge it, but not possible to create a waterway out of it. And this whole inland waterway endeavor, it proved uneconomical, and the British left it altogether. And there was an example of coast canal on the Orissa coast that was built, but it could not be run for long. Then electric telegraph, so it was also introduced, telegraph and postal services, and all of which were just for their own interest, for British interest. It were not for people. Then comes the conclusion that by the time India won its independence after 200 years of British colonial rule, India was drenched of everything. India was totally dilapidated. Dilapidated is the right word. It means to leave someone harassed and exploited to the last penny. So the Indian agriculture, it was also saddled with surplus labor. There were many people, but productivity was low. Then industrial sector, it was crying for modernization, diversification, and capacity building. Foreign trade, it was oriented to feed the industrial revolution in Britain or to feed the factories of Britain of raw material which was bought from poor Indian peasants. Then infrastructure facility, railway network, it needed upgradation to connection to the remote areas. And there were rampant poverty and unemployment that required state welfare policies. Now let's take a recap. So under the colonial dispensation, economic policies of the government were concerned more with the protection and promotion of British economic interests. So we were just subject, we were not given any political and economic right. We were not considered fit enough to rule a country, let alone sitting equal. Then agricultural sector, which absorbed lot of population before the advent of the British, they exploited it so much so that its backbone, the backbone of a self-reliant economy, which consisted of cottage industry, household industries, and year-round agricultural dispensation, all of were destroyed by the British by charging us doubly. That means by destroying the cottage industry, by establishing the monopoly in foreign trade, by eliminating all the competitors at both local and the international level, they were charging us twice. At first, they were not buying the Indian products, not they were letting others buy our products. So our products or finished product, whether it were cotton clothes, handicraft products, metal and tools, they were left to ruin. And then we were bought off the raw material that were we producing. It was bought at cheaper prices, at low prices. It was sent to the factories, to the industries in Britain, and the finished product that was produced by those industries, it was sold to the Indian consumer themselves. And in such an endeavor, we were charged twice, we were extorted twice, and this situation for 200 years cumulatively, it deprived us of everything. Then systematic policies of the British government, it led to collapse of world's famous handicraft industry, which was by that time were patronized by local rulers, the Mughal and the Delhi Sultanate rulers, and such handicraft, it were renowned, famous all over the world, and because of which the bullion, got it somehow drained, found its place in Indian treasuries. Then lack of public health facilities, occurrence of frequent natural calamities and famine, those artificial drought that were led by the British policy that pauperized the Indian people. Then British colonial, they did some effort to improve infrastructure, but it was to serve their own interests, selfish motives, such as the construction of railway, telegraph, postal, and this is it. We'll proceed on to the next chapter in the next video. Thank you very much. Kindly subscribe the channel.